Today we're talking about mini consoles, and instead of one red-haired dude who loves video games, this time we've got two dudes. That's right, I'm excited to say that none other than DreamcastGuy will be joining me for this week's video. Okay, so I think the biggest thing that gets people excited about these mini consoles right off the bat is the value and convenience. These consoles come with a list of games that would cost $1 bajillion to try to track down all the original copies, not to mention the hardware and equipment required to make them look decent. But it's more than that. I mean, there were mini consoles before the NES Mini really started this whole craze. To me, the big difference is that these consoles are actually made by the companies themselves. Nintendo releasing a console themselves is just always something people have gotten excited about. I mean, they could release a console called the Nintendo Turd Box and people would still be lining up to buy it on launch day. I sure would. Take the Wii U for example. It sold poorly in the long run, but I actually had a hard time finding mine in stores at launch. Anyways, the reason why companies making these consoles themselves is so important is because it means a higher chance of a quality product. Let's take the Sega Genesis Mini for example. By the way, this is the larger original model I have here. Back in the early stages of this console being announced, it was revealed that AtGames would be working on it and everybody's excitement immediately went down the toilet. This is because AtGames is responsible for a whole slew of Genesis clone consoles that received all sorts of complaints regarding poor quality. It wasn't until Sega said that they'd gotten rid of AtGames and were taking on the project themselves that people really started to get hyped for the console. And sure, they're collaborating with them too, but they're a trusted partner and Sega relying on them instead of AtGames has allowed them to promise first-party production quality. And sure, these consoles can still have issues. I mean, we all remember the 3-foot controller cords on the NES Classic. Definitely a design choice that had a lot of people scratching their heads. However, there were workarounds and people were still pretty happy with the product overall, as opposed to something like the PS1 Classic that got completely screwed up and wound up in bargain bins. Okay, so we've talked about why these consoles have appeal in the here and now, but what about when it comes to the preservation of video games and their history? Well, for that question, I'm gonna go ahead and turn things over to DreamcastGuy. Take it away, my man.
Video games as an art form is very, very different from anything else. It's not like a book that you can just read, or a piece of music you can listen to, or a movie that you can go to the cinema and watch. Instead, it's a little bit of all of this. It is a compilation of data, which for better or worse, means that it's actually something that is very, very easy to lose. A lot of people don't realize this, but there are hundreds and hundreds of video games that completely disappear into the ether, and they're very, very hard to get back because not only do we have to find these games, but getting them to work once again can be harder than just finding an old CD and managing to restore it. Take something like this. This is actually the completely lost game of Half-Life on the Dreamcast. Now, this game is amazing. I've actually played it myself. This is the only way I've ever beaten the original Half-Life, and it was lost for a very, very long time. It was actually completed, and before they were able to release it, the entire development team was essentially moved on to a different project. So some of the people secretly leaked it out of the internet, that way archivists could get a hold of it and finally restore it into its original, very interesting glory. Now, this is something that's sometimes considered controversial, but I am a very, very big supporter of micro consoles, mostly for this restoration aspect. These are games that are actually kept perfectly intact in their original form. This is the Super Nintendo Classic, obviously, the SNES Mini, and on it, it contains several of the very best of the best different games from this era. It has a lot of RPGs and big beat-em-ups and all sorts of stuff that is extremely fun to play. But more than that, this actually gives us a new way to play their original format. Trying to keep these cartridges forever, which I have some in my background here, is a little bit more difficult because we do have cartridge rot, we do have degradation, and there could just be a tornado that completely blows over my house because I live in Texas and we have tornadoes all the time. Keeping this stuff perfectly preserved is becoming an increasingly more difficult task. And so I really like the idea of a lot of these mini consoles simply because I do think that in the grand scheme of things, it's going to make the digital preservation of this stuff much more ubiquitous. More people are going to have access to this because, let's face it, people are hacking these. People are cracking them open and taking out a lot of these perfectly restored ROMs and keeping them even more perfectly preserved. So it just seems like to me that these mini consoles, if anything, are a net benefit. Now, additionally, as somebody who does a lot of different collecting for a lot of different consoles, I of course also like the additional benefit of whenever they release these mini systems, typically it makes the prices of these original assets, like the original complete in-box games, their prices often plummet. Now, I like that because I want to try and own stuff. I like to have the physical media as best I can, until eventually, of course, my house is blown over by that eventual tornado. I think that in general, this stuff is great. These mini consoles, whether it be the Genesis Mini or the TurboGrafx 16 or the SNES Mini, these give us just more options to play stuff, and they become a better sort of, well, a monument to the classics, a real way to try and preserve this stuff and keep it even more perfectly intact in the modern day, and of course, extra accessible to those who may have missed it.
So there you have it. I obviously agree with everything he had to say. I mean, a lot of gamers do. We love video games, and so it only makes sense that we'd want the medium to stay as well preserved as possible. You know, it's actually kind of funny to think about, but these mini consoles that we consider, as DreamcastGuy called them, monuments to the classics, to these systems that we consider retro, will one day be considered retro collector items themselves. So even if some of the original hardware and software doesn't survive over the years, whether it be to general degradation, collections like DreamcastGuy's getting scooped up by a Wizard of Oz scale tornado, or an earthquake in my case since I live in California, we'll at least have all these additional mini consoles out in the wild, of which hopefully a good chunk will survive the years to come, with their ROMs intact, thus helping to preserve these games and systems. Another point I'm glad he made that not everybody necessarily thinks about is how these mini consoles often result in the prices of the original software dropping. This is a win-win. The people who want to collect this stuff can enjoy lower prices to acquire it, and the people who find the mini consoles to be a more convenient way to enjoy these games are able to do so that way. And not only that, the more people there are playing these older games, the better their legacies will live on. Because it's not just about collectors holding on to this stuff. It's about that lived experience of actually playing these games so that people know what they are and can allow their popularity to live on. Quick example, I've got a friend who has 2 sons, and like most kids and adults who play video games, they've got a Nintendo Switch. But not only that, they've got an NES Classic, and so his boys know what stuff like the original Castlevania is and can appreciate it. That probably wouldn't be the case if not for the hype surrounding the NES Classic that attracted so many non-collectors to buying one. Whatever your reason is for wanting one of these mini consoles, or perhaps if you have no use whatsoever for them, it still stands to reason that these are, as DreamcastGuy put it, a net benefit for gaming in the long run. Okay, I think that just about does it for this video, but we do have one more message from DreamcastGuy before we go.
Thanks so much for watching this video, everybody. This has been over on Retro's YouTube channel, so if you want to try and support a smaller creator, which you absolutely should, be sure to tap that subscribe button to see all of his further content. This has been a fun video to help with, and I'm really good buddies with him. He does some really interesting stuff, so be sure to support smaller creators, subscribe to smaller creators, and shout them out. These dudes absolutely rock, and they're trying their best to give you entertainment, even if they don't have 1 million subs. Retro, you rock, and I'm happy you reached out to me to help with this random project.
As am I. You know, I've been subscribed to DreamcastGuy's channel for years and years now. I remember finding him when he was just this small little channel, so it's been a lot of fun to watch his channel grow as his content has evolved over the years. And a huge blast to now collaborate with him. He's a cool dude, and even more than that, he's got a very inspiring backstory. If you've never watched his Who is DreamcastGuy video, you should. I find YouTubers to be so much more likable once you get to know them, and it'll make you appreciate his content even more. So with that, thank you all for watching, and I will see ya in the next video.